Hello, everyone. My name is Celine Gallagher, and I'm the Scientific Chair of the Australian POTS Foundation. On behalf of the Foundation, I welcome you all to our first webinar for 2024. Today's special guest has been invited after feedback from our community last year showed that many people wanted to learn more about practical steps that can be taken to manage symptoms associated with POTS. So more about our special guest, Kimberly, in a moment. But before I get on to that, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are hosting this webinar from the lands of the Kaurna people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you will join us from today, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. Now over to our special guest, who has a wealth of information to share with us today. I'm very delighted to present Dr. Kimberly Hindman. Kimberly grew up on the East Coast of America, and she graduated from the College of William and Mary with a Bachelor of Science in Biology. She completed an MA in Ecotoxicology at Duke University and worked in the environmental consulting field before finishing her naturopathic medicine degree and Master of Science in Oriental Medicine degrees at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in 2004. She came to study naturopathic and Chinese medicines through her own healing journey after the drugs of caring and well-intentioned doctors failed to provide benefit and physicians ran out of ideas. Kimberly herself has hypermobile EDS, POTS, MCAS, and has had release surgery for an occult tethered cord. So she understands complex health conditions, as many of us who are present here today will have. Kimberly's naturopathic medicine is based in the philosophy of biotherapeutic drainage and uses a wide variety of treatment options, including basic naturopathic treatments, herbs, nutrition, and homeopathy. She utilizes the best of modern Western medicine research and science while appreciating and valuing patient ideas and intuitions. Her Chinese medicine education is grounded in the classical traditions with additional focus in Seven Dragons treatment of the five-element tradition. She combines her love of science with her curiosity, intuition, and desire to serve others. She is passionate about healthcare and brings great energy, caring, and dedication to her relationships with patients. Her strong scientific background acts as the medical foundation to her practice. The art of her practice comes from her desire to know her patients and think outside the box to help them achieve their health and life goals. Now, Kimberly has come with a lot of information to share with us this morning. So it's just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. So you will be sent a copy of the recording to watch back at a later time point. Kimberly has also kindly agreed to share her slides with us. So you will all be sent a copy of her slides to look back on it at later time points as well. And we really appreciate that, Kimberly. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A button, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen, and we'll aim to get through as many as we can at the end of today's presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kimberly, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, so we're going to talk about cell danger response, polyvagal theory, and limbic retraining. I just have my little disclaimer there at the bottom. So I want to talk about how all of those things fit together and how they can contribute to a patient's cellular, neurologic, and whole person experience. I'm going to bring this up multiple times through the talk, but I want to be absolutely clear that none of this is psychogenic, none of it's made up, none of it's imagined. This is about how your autonomic, which means your automatic nervous system, is functioning, and how that nervous system signaling then affects your tissues and individual cells. So I will tell patients, if someone tells you that this is all in your head, you can reply by saying, yes, because my brain is in my head, and that's what's driving this. So I want to give a particular thanks to Dr. Neil Nathan for introducing the theory of the cell danger response to me originally. Whoops, excuse me. This was a theory that was developed by Dr. Robert Navio, who published several papers in the journal Mitochondria in 2014 and 2019. And his theory is that the cell danger response, or the CDR, is a metabolic response that is activated when a cell encounters some kind of threat that could injure or kill that cell. And he has a very large list of things. I have a few things that I've added on in terms of what I have seen from patients that I think could be those triggers. But it can be infections, it can be physical traumas, chemical traumas, psychological traumas. And this is a response that's coordinated in the brain, but it comes from input from the whole body and including the microbiome. So the body has this response to any threat at all. And if it's small, something like a cold, a cut, a bruise, and there aren't other issues, the cells will go through this process very quickly and easily, and then we get back to a state of health. So you might feel lousy for a week with your cold, but it resolves completely after a short period of time, and there are no lingering then effects. Problems with this system arise, though, when you've got a mixture of threats. So, for example, you have multiple infections all at the same time. If you have repeated or ongoing threats, say you have a chronic strep carrier and they're getting chronic sore throats, and this just never actually ends up and completely resolves and goes away. Or if you have someone who has susceptible genetics, for example, someone who doesn't clear mold toxins very well genetically, those are all going to start creating synergistic effects, and that will start to then create problems with this response system that we have that is built into our bodies. So when there is this threat, there's a whole coordinated set of responses that's triggered, and it's really to help defend us and to protect us. And there's a huge list. So if people really want to like geek out on the science, you can go to Dr. Navio's paper, and he lists out all of the changes that happen. And there's quite a few of them, but the majority of them are about helping to try and contain what's happening, releasing chemicals that may help to deal with the threat, such as like an antimicrobial or antiviral chemical, or then chemicals that indicate to other neighboring cells, hey, we've got something that's going on. These changes will also change the behavior of the person. So when we're sick and we really want to stay home and just sleep, that's actually part of that cell danger response, because the body is saying, I need you to sleep so that we can use the energy that you would use for daily activities towards healing. And I'm going to basically make you go to sleep so I can do that. So even things like that are part of that cell danger response to help us actually to heal up and get better faster. The biggest change in all of the cellular changes is the cellular metabolism gets slowed down. And this is done specifically so that if there's an infection, that organism can't then hijack the cell's metabolism for its own purpose. So this impact is we see primarily in the mitochondria, which is what produces energy in the cell. So the mitochondria then use less oxygen because they're making less energy. So it leaves more oxygen in the cell. And Dr. Navio's theory is that this increased oxygen helps to actually shield the cell from further injury, because it has an impact on the virus, the bacteria, whatever it is the infection is. The challenge is that it also creates more reactive oxygen species, which can then create oxidative damage. But his theory is that if you have someone who has high reactive oxygen species, that may be an indication that the cells are trying to shield themselves, and it's not something that's just about damage. And this may be why I personally have seen that antioxidants and mitochondrial supports don't work very well for somebody who's in this acute phase of response. We're trying to override what the body's doing on purpose. And this makes a lot of sense when it's that short-term acute kind of process. The challenge with it is that this cellular response makes it harder to eliminate heavy metals and other toxins, so those can accumulate during this initial phase. And if somebody stays in this cell danger response, then those will also continue to accumulate and add another layer of basically issue that the person is dealing with. So The CDR is initially very adaptive. It actually serves a purpose, and it is actually good for us. And it's coordinated by the interaction of the mitochondria in the cell, but it can become maladaptive and actually detrimental to us once that environmental danger is gone. So the healing process is that the body has to go through, the cells have to go through the 3 stages of the cell danger response. And they're very distinct stages. And one stage has to be completed before you can go into the next one. And the mitochondria have to be ready to function differently for that next step, for all of that to happen. And it can be happening cell by cell. So you can have one cell that's in the cell danger 1, neighboring cell that's in 2, somebody else is in 3. And they will all hopefully get through all 3 stages and get back to healing. And the restoration of normal communication between the neighboring and distant cells is the last step of that healing cycle. So this is the diagram from his paper. I'm not going to go through all the detail in this, but you can see there are different things. Then, like up in the top right is where those triggers come in, and then the CDR kicks on, and you go through CDR1, CDR2, CDR3, and then you get back to health. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the highlights of each of the 3 stages so that you can kind of get a sense of what's happening in each one of these. So the function of CDR1 is really about damage control. This is the red alert. This is when the sirens are going off in the cells and saying, hey, we've got something here. What everybody kind of high alert. This is when you've got inflammation being produced. You're trying to then let other cells know that something going on. And they do that actually by disconnecting their communication with cells. So if a cell, say, has a virus in it, it will try and contain that virus within itself and let other cells know, I'm not communicating anymore, so that they know there's something wrong with that cell. So remember that initial list of triggers, there's a lot of things that can trigger this. And to move out of the CDR1 into CDR2 requires the creation of less oxidizing, or there's all that oxygen being created, and less inflammatory environment that's conducive for rebuilding, because that's then that next step. People can get stuck in any one of the 3 stages. And Dr. Navio believes that when people are stuck in CDR1, that may be what's happening when people have chronic infections, because they just never get a break from the cells seeing, oh, there's an infection here. Oh, there's another infection. It's not a different one, it's the same one, but it just keeps happening over and over and over. So they're never able to get out of this alert stage to move into CDR2. And I have found that if somebody is stuck in this stage, they often, again, do not respond to supportive treatments, especially the mitochondrial support, even if their energy is really low, because the body is trying to keep the mitochondria functioning low on purpose. In CDR2, the main function is cellular replacement. So stem cells are recruited to replace the cells that died or were too damaged to be repaired by everything that happened in CDR1. People can get stuck in CDR2. And Dr. Navio's theory is that this may be happening, this may be what's happening in cancer, because you just have ongoing cell growth. But these cells aren't connecting up with other cells. They're not communicating, and they're not functioning normally. They're just growing and growing and growing and multiplying. And so this is a part of tissue healing and repair, but at some point it has to stop. And then you move into CDR3. The function of this is then cellular differentiation. This is where those stem cells learn and figure, oh, I need to become a skin cell or a bone cell or a liver cell. And I need to then join up with the other cells and become an organ or a tissue and learn how to function within that bigger framework. This is then where, if, say, any metals have accumulated or other toxins, this is when the cell starts being able to detoxify and eliminate those. And so this is when the cells stop dividing and start establishing those connections with their neighbors. And I think this next bullet is so fascinating, because healing will remain incomplete until these cells receive instructions and materials from older neighboring cells that carry the metabolic memories and programming from before the time of the tissue injury that activated the CDR in the first place. So this is like the mother tree in forests. So what we've learned about in forests is there are very old trees that they now are referring to as mother trees. And when you have seedlings kind of growing up and being saplings, they will connect through the root system to that mother tree. And that tree will then send nutrients, chemicals, different signals to those saplings about say, pests or water conditions or sun conditions or different environmental things that the trees need to know about to change their metabolism so that they can survive. So we do this within our own bodies as well. Our older cells will help the new ones to say, okay, this is how you act like a liver or a bone or whatever the tissue is. And as this process continues, the cells also reestablish those connections with the autonomic nervous system and then the lymphatic system. People can get stuck in this phase as well, because remember, this isn't the full, this is still a stage of healing that gets you then to kind of baseline and homeostasis and health. So when people get stuck in this stage, this may be what's happening with ongoing pain syndromes, where the connection to the nervous system and then that sensory and pain modulation doesn't happen correctly with those cells. So the way the nervous system is communicating with these new cells isn't functioning correctly. And so in chronic illness, the original triggering event may no longer be present, because most chronic illness is caused by the biological reaction to an injury, not the injury itself or the agent of the injury itself. So this is like one of the thoughts that may be happening with long COVID is that there isn't ongoing virus. It's that the immune system reaction to the initial infection has now gotten dysregulated and is continuing in that state. And that's what's creating some of the symptoms of long COVID. I was at a seminar just a couple of weeks ago, and Dr. Bruce Patterson was talking about the fact that they have looked for long sequences of DNA to see, is there actual COVID virus in patients who have long COVID? And they can't find it. So they find little snippets of the genetic material, but they don't find long stretches that would indicate that you actually have virus that is replicating in this person anymore. So this can happen if healing is incomplete between injuries. So let's say you have an injury, you're almost through, and then you get injured again, and the whole thing starts over again. There are ongoing injuries or repeated, the cells can get caught in a loop of incomplete recovery. And this then creates these ongoing alarm signals, cells that can't integrate into the tissue, which then leads to immune dysfunction, and I would say also the nervous system dysfunction. So there are some thoughts about how this specifically actually relates to POTS. So the sympathetic nervous system is dominant during an acute illness because we're under stress. And when the CDR then is chronically activated because you just have this ongoing triggering, the coordination between the two limbs of the vagus nerve gets disrupted, and that allows the sympathetic nervous system to stay dominant. We will talk about the two branches of the vagus nerve in a little bit when we talk about vagus nerve stuff. And the vagus nerve has normal variations in its outflow. It goes through cycles. And the majority of its signaling is anti-inflammatory. But when these variations are disrupted, which they will be during the CDR, you can get all sorts of autonomic abnormalities, including the dysautonomia that can result in POTS. And there are also some autoimmune components that look like they may be tied to the fact that then the anti-inflammatory signaling of the vagus nerve now has dropped. So that creates an immune dysregulation. The metabolic memory of the past experiences will prime the cellular response to future exposures, again, even when that ongoing trigger of stress is no longer present. So if someone is having episodes of symptoms, the cells remember that. And then when there is something that is similar now or in the future, the body goes back to that library basically of experiences and responds the same way. And I want you to remember, all of this is happening at cellular and nervous system levels. This is not conscious. So I really feel like it's important that treatment needs to look at any of the possible triggers to work at the cellular level, and needs to look at then the direct nervous system support for vagus nerve and limbic system. Because if the original trigger or triggers is strong enough or long lasting, the nervous system will actually change how it's functioning because of that significant or ongoing threat. It actually starts to adapt to this being my new baseline. And therefore, when the threat's gone, the symptoms remain because the nervous system is still in that state and it needs that retraining. So this is where then polyvagal theory and understanding comes in, and why the vagus nerve supports and the limbic system retraining are really, I think, essential to full healing. So the vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves, and it exits the brain out of the back of the head, and it travels down the neck and the throat and into the abdomen. And it sends signals to all these different areas, but it basically innervates all of the internal organs. And vagus nerve dysfunction can be involved in symptoms involving any of those organs. And I wonder if this is part of why people with POTS often have multi-system symptoms. This is not just a cardiovascular thing. People can have symptoms in all kinds of systems. Some of it may relate to blood flow, but it may also have a vagal nerve component, because if there's vagal nerve dysfunction that's affecting blood pressure regulation and control, then that could affect any other system that also receives signals from the vagus nerve, which is basically all of your internal organs. So Dr. Stephen Porges came up with the polyvagal theory, and it's explained really well in Dr. Stanley Rosenberg's book, Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve. I would really recommend this book. I really like it, and it's really well written for the layperson to understand kind of what's going on in the body. So the old model was that you had two circuits and they were opposite each other. You had the sympathetic, which was active in the stress response, and you had parasympathetic, which was like the rest and digest and relaxation. That was associated with the vagus nerve. And basically you had these two poles that would oppose each other. Dr. Porges has this polyvagal theory, and his theory is that there are two branches to the vagus nerve, and they're very different. So you actually have three different circuits. And so these branches were the branches of what Dr. Navio had been referring to. So the three branches are, you have the sympathetic, which is actually a chain along the spinal cord. This is your fight or flight. And fight can be actual fighting, but it can also be, especially as we're talking about limbic system and vagus nerve dysfunction, even interpreting others as aggressive or attacking in their actions or words. So if, again, it reminds someone, if they're in a situation that reminds them of a situation where they were in an aggressive situation, say for example with someone else, that may get interpreted the same way. Flight can be running away, but it can also be kind of withdrawing and avoiding conflict. The branches of the vagus nerve are the ventral, meaning front, and dorsal, meaning back. The ventral is that positive state of relaxation. It's social engagement. It's where we're in the, like life is good. The dorsal is the freeze response. This is slow down, shut down, disengagement. This is playing dead. This is where everything has just stopped. So this dorsal vagus gets activated when we face an overwhelming force. So if our nervous systems are assessing a situation and it's stressful and we feel, or our nervous system decides we can't run away fast enough and we're not strong enough to fight and possibly win, we will immobilize. So this is in nature. When you see an animal playing dead, it's saying, I can't fight off this attacker and win. So I'm just going to play dead and hope that they will leave me alone because they don't want to deal with anything that's dead. In people, this can create feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and apathy, which can really lead to a lot of withdrawal, shutdown, and disengagement. What I think is very interesting and why I think this is important to think about in POTS is that sudden or extreme surges in dorsal vagus activity can cause an actual medical shock response, which can be demonstrated by loss of muscle tone, a profound drop in blood pressure, fainting, sweating, nausea. That sounds an awful lot like what we see in POTS. And so I have some questions about whether POTS is, in fact, a sympathetic dominant, or could it be that there are times that it's a dorsal vagus dominant? So there can be, with this, there can be physical shutdown, it can be mental shutdown, and that is different than brain fog. This is where like brain just does not work. An emotional shutdown, and all of that can then lead to social shutdown. So I want to just emphasize, this is very different than somebody like, if they've overdone it a little and they're tired, they need a couple of days of rest. People who are in this state are exhausted. They are completely wiped out, and there is nothing that they can do. Like, this is not about, well, get some more sleep, or, eat something, or get some water, or, have some caffeine, or like, it's not that. They are absolutely wiped. And this is difficult because if people don't understand that this is a nervous system state, they can hear from other people, you can't really be that tired, or you could push through it if you really wanted to, or if you cared. It's not just that you're tired and you're just being lazy. This is nervous system driven. This is not a choice. And this is your nervous system has shut you down. And so the role of the autonomic nervous system in POTS may be more complicated than we thought, because it may not just be you're in fight or flight, you're in sympathetic dominance. The problem really is when somebody gets stuck in this state and becomes immobilized, or their system can really shift only between the dorsal vagus and the sympathetic states. And remember, both of those are threat states. They are not restful states. And this level of nervous system dysfunction can then also start to affect hormones, because your adrenal glands are going to be activated as part of the stress response. So then as you get cortisol and DHEA being elevated, then you can get into adrenal fatigue, where then those hormone levels will drop. And imbalances in those hormones will then affect all your other hormones. And hormones will then affect everything in your body. And then will feed back onto the nervous system. And then you can get loops then between the endocrine system, the nervous system, and immune function. This is all really important to know, because healing cannot happen when you are in a sympathetic or a dorsal vagus state. So if you're in a fight or flight or a freeze, you cannot heal. The body will not do it. No matter how much you want to, it won't do it. For me, this means that happiness, relaxation, and safety are essential to health. These are not bonuses. These are not extras or things that would be great to have. We as humans need to have them. This is part of self-care. And so these are really essential for people to actually heal. And so I will talk about this with patients about, just recently, I gave a patient some homework to write down everything that brings her joy. Nothing was too small to be on that list. And then to start thinking about how can she bring those things more and more into her everyday life, because that is really important. So social engagement is also a really big part of that. And as in the animal world, only mammals have that ventral vagus branch, and it's activated when we are and feel safe in our bodies. And when we're in that state of social engagement, and that's a term that Dr. Porges uses, we experience feelings of love and friendship, cooperation, bonding, healthy sexual relationships, better communication, and we share all these different aspects of life. And so this is good for us because it creates the safety and health as an individual person, but it's also the foundation of our group culture. This is how we bond with other people and create community, is when we have experiences with each other when we're in this state. So the polyvagal theory says that the nervous system evaluation of risk does not require conscious awareness. So I think this is really important, because this means your nervous system is assessing whether you are safe, whether you're aware of that consciously or not. And it will look at environmental features, but also visceral features, meaning internal signaling features, and designate whether they are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. Life-threatening is obviously just a higher state of dangerous. So it's important to know that you're really looking at safe or dangerous. There isn't a whole lot of middle ground. It's one or the other. And so we may not be consciously aware of the stimulus that triggered whatever the neurologic responses that we're having. We do know when we are having it, because we can be aware of our body's responses. So we may not always know what triggered a flare, but we know when we're having those symptoms. And that can be helpful to then start to kind of use some of that information to work backwards, to try and figure out, okay, what are my triggers? What was it this time? And what then can I do to help myself? And that's some of this that we'll talk about later. But this becomes an issue when you have a nervous system that is doing this evaluation of risk, which is normal, that's good. But if you are in one of these cell danger responses, then that's going to lead to hypervigilance, and it's going to lead to hyperreactivity that is outside of our conscious control, which then gets us into nervous system dysfunction, because the vagus nerve then is getting all these signals that are saying, oh, we're getting all these danger signals, so we must be in a threat state, which then will feed back onto the CDR and keep that going. And then you start getting issues of healing, because they're in a loop with each other. Dr. Rosenberg found the best way to move somebody out of either that sympathetic or the dorsal vagal dominance, either of the threat states, is to activate the ventral vagus, because it will inhibit those other pathways. So we don't have to worry about how do we get you specifically out of that freeze or out of fight or flight. If we can get you into the rest, relaxation, calm, safety place, those other things will just stop. So that's why with a lot of the vagus nerve issues and support, it's really about how do we get you into that place and how do we support that process, which is actually a lot nicer and more enjoyable in general. So all this activity, all this vagus nerve activity gets sent then to the limbic system, which is the place in the higher brain, in the brain that will then assess if something is dangerous or safe. So this is a part of the reptilian part of the brain, and it's an older part, and it's mostly concerned with assessing for survival. Like the vagus nerve, it's binary. You're either a threat or you're safe. And it's designed to keep us safe. And like all other parts of the brain, it can learn, especially with a repeated stimulus or signal. And what it learns depends upon the input that it's getting. So that's where the limbic system retraining comes in. So in general, the limbic system regulates and controls emotions, sensitivity to stimuli, cognition, energy, and pain. It's how we interpret, remember, and respond to stimuli. And this is the part of the brain that is doing that neuroevaluation of risk that Dr. Porges was talking about. It's also involved in memory, storage, and retrieval. And it is the link between the conscious part of the brain and the unconscious autonomic functions of the brain stem. So if you think of something really happy, relaxing, lovely, and your heart rate lowers, that's happening because your thoughts connected to the limbic system, which then told brainstem, reduce heart rate because we're relaxed. So we can use that link in all of the limbic system retraining that we're going to be talking about. So part of the limbic system function is to make associations with other stimuli when we are in a dangerous situation so we can learn. So for example, you eat spoiled food and you get food poisoning. The next time you smell food that smells a little bit off, you're not going to eat it because you're going to remember, oh, wait, the last time I ate something that smelled that way, I got sick. That is a specific and correct association, so it's helpful. It's correct because the thing that we're looking at as a potential trigger was the actual thing that created the symptoms. The problem becomes is when it is just getting bombarded with signaling, the limbic system can start making associations that are general and incorrect, meaning that didn't actually cause your symptoms. It was just around at the same time. The problem with that is then stimuli that are actually safe could be linked with being in danger, or might be considered to be, oh, that's what caused it, and then can be used in future situations to assess if something is dangerous. So I have an example in here that you can read through. The main point with this is that the limbic system can make mistakes in determining what was the cause of the threat. And so we have to try and understand where those associations are and get clarity around that so that then the limbic system can actually do its job and actually help protect us in a real and valuable way. Because the limbic system will use past experiences and kind of that library, as I was talking about, to then say, okay, for my current state, let me look around in my library and see if there was anything that was similar. Oh, look, I had this experience that was similar here. That was I put in the dangerous category. So what I'm dealing with right now might be dangerous too. So I'm going to give you a nervous system response that says this is dangerous, whether or not it actually is. And so that's, again, where we've got to get that retraining back in. So when the limbic system is impaired by this ongoing inflammation and this abnormal signaling it's getting from the vagus nerve, it will then adapt and actually disorganize normal neural circuits in the brain. And this will cause distortions in the unconscious reactions, sensory perceptions, and protective responses. And then over time, this becomes habitual to the nervous system because this becomes the new normal. And nerves that co-activate at any time will then start to do so automatically if it happens often enough. So if nerve 1 gets signaled with something and that then signals nerve 2, over time, they will just start signaling together. You don't have to have this be a stepwise process. They'll just both activate. And then the brain will then get stuck in this state of chronic emergency and hypervigilance, which will actually contribute to nervous system dysfunction and neuroinflammation. So that probably feels like, oh no, how do we get out of all that? That sounds awful. We have a built-in system that we can use to get out of that, and it works really, really well. And that is brain plasticity. So this is the idea that the brain can create new connections. This is what is happening whenever we learn anything. And with repetition, we become faster and more skilled at what we're learning. So if I say to you, what's 3 plus 7? If somebody is just learning addition, they may have to stop and think, okay, 3 and then 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, the answer is 7. But I bet everybody who's listening had that immediately as soon as I said it. Because if you've done that addition over and over and over and over, your brain doesn't have to think about it. You will just have it already. This is also what's happening when someone regains functioning after a brain injury like a stroke. So other nerves will connect up in different ways to either partly or fully recover the functions that the damaged part used to do. So I had a patient who had MS, and her brain imaging was awful. I mean, I had a radiologist actually tell me at one point, her brain looks like Swiss cheese. There's so much damage in here. But she was able, with all the work that we did, to regain enough functioning. She finished her bachelor's, she finished her master's, she is working full time, she's a mom, and she said things that she had lost, she has now regained. And it's because the brain relearned to do it, maybe in a roundabout way, but it was still able to get that functioning back because of this idea of brain plasticity. The key is all brain plasticity is dependent upon what the input to the brain is. So if the brain keeps hearing, I'm safe, I'm happy, I'm relaxed, it's going to learn that. And if it keeps hearing the opposite, it's going to learn that. And so that's why I say that limbic hypervigilance is the dark side of brain plasticity. So when those repeated stimuli are traumatic, remember again, everything that was on Dr. Navio's list was a big list. Then we get into dysfunction. And then reinforcement of the trauma loop can then spread to other forms of the sensory stimuli, other things we experience, because the entire system now becomes hypervigilant at its baseline. So I had a couple of things, I had quotes from other people that I really, really liked and I wanted to share with you. So this was, the first one's from Dr. Neil Nathan. He said that once in survival mode, the limbic system will focus its energies on survival only. And that makes sense because your brain is thinking we are in a survival situation. But this means that energy is then taken away from other processes, including growth, communication between cells, regeneration, absorption of nutrients, excretion of waste products. I think this is partly why we see some of the GI symptoms that we do when we have limbic dysfunction, because the GI actually takes a lot of energy. That system requires a lot of energy to do all the things that it does. And it doesn't have it, it's not going to absorb the nutrition from your food. You're not going to digest your food as well. Things are not going to move along. And so we start seeing symptoms, I think, in other systems because of this global energy shift. And the long-term protective behaviors begin to feed then the threat behavior. So the more a patient reacts with fear to a stimulus, the stronger the association to that stimulus, the stronger the stimulus, the faster the patient's going to react. The reaction then becomes this unconscious process. And according to Annie Hopper, and she's one of the people who has developed one of the limbic system retraining programs we'll mention, this process of sensitization where patients start finding themselves reacting to lesser amounts of stimuli and more classes of stimuli is something that she calls kindling. And those reactions can then spread to all different senses and different kinds of stimuli. So I want to stop for a minute and just reemphasize, this is happening in the autonomic nervous system and the limbic system, which are out of your conscious control. So the limbic system is actually designed by design to be faster than your conscious thought. And that's because if you truly are in danger, you don't want to have to think about assessing a situation and what you should do. Like if you're standing in a crosswalk and you see a car driving towards you, you don't want to stand there and say, I wonder, does that person see that they have a red light and that I'm in the crosswalk? Are they going to stop in time? I wonder if I should move out of the way. You're going to see that and you're going to hustle because your limbic system is going to register, this is dangerous, I need to move. And this is why sometimes people will say, like, I was in that situation, I found myself on the other sidewalk before I even knew what was happening, right? That's because your limbic system registered that there was danger, activated your sympathetic nervous system, you got the adrenaline, and you moved. And that's important. We need to have that, but it needs to be in balance with all of the other things that we need in our brains. They are not, these reactions that are happening are not made up, and nobody is choosing them. This is happening again at that nervous system level. And your limbic system is actually trying to protect you, which is a good thing. But if your limbic system is hypervigilant, it can't actually do its job. So I have down here Rose, not Freckles, and I will explain this. My sister had a dog named Freckles, and Freckles barked at everything. Freckles barked when a chipmunk ran across the neighbor's driveway. They had a tree outside their kitchen window, and when a leaf would fall off the tree in the fall, he would bark. He would bark if somebody came to the door. He would bark if there was a deer in the backyard. He would bark at everything, which meant she had to go and check every time he was barking because she didn't know, was somebody at the door and she needed to take care of it. It was actually really disruptive to her being able to do anything if he started barking. We had a dog named Rose. Rose just did not bark. We had her for months. She was part of our family for months before we even heard her bark the first time. She would bark if somebody came to the door and knocked at the door, but otherwise she didn't bark. So we knew if Rose was barking, she was trying to say, hey, human, check this out. There's something going on here you need to pay attention to. So I want a limbic system that is basically acting like my guard dog. It's trying to keep me safe. That is actually telling me when there is something at everything. So put this part of it all together, and then we'll talk about the vagus nerve supports in the limbic system retraining. If someone has a cellular threat, and one of those things in that long list, this threat is large, ongoing, or repeated. Somebody can get stuck in any of the 3 stages of the cell danger response, which will prevent healing. I personally see most people who are stuck in the CDR1 state. And I think that's probably what's happening more often with patients with POTS. As part of this goes to the limbic system. The limbic system then becomes sensitized and becomes faster, more sensitive, and more reactive, and starts making these incorrect associations between external factors and what's happening with these internal danger signals. And these changes in the vagus nerve of the limbic system can continue even after that original threat is gone. And these changes then can feed back and then keep someone in a cell danger response, and the cycle just keeps continuing. We need to have a treatment that looks at and treats any of the actual threats if they're still present, stimulating the ventral vagus nerve to get it functioning again, and retraining the limbic system to do its job of discerning true danger to keep us safe. And I just put a note down just here that all of these are theories right now, and they'll probably change over time, and they may not fit exactly for every patient, but I think they do give us a framework to guide treatment to help understand kind of what's happening, because there are people who go to the doctor. Is not the correct thing to say. They should be saying your tests are normal. We don't know what then, like these results are not giving us the answer to why you are having these symptoms. And so it gets very, very frustrating for patients when they're still feeling what they're feeling and they're told that they're fine. They can't find anything. There's nothing showing up on their lab tests, their imaging, whatever. And so we have no answers for you because we don't know what's happening. There could be an element to what they're experiencing that's this vagus nerve and limbic system retraining issue. So this is now we're going to get into the what do we do about it part. So I have a list. I'm not going to go through every single slide that I have because I have a lot of slides on these, but I wanted everybody to have the information about these different things. I would say for the ventral vagus stimulation, almost anything that makes you feel is a good thing. And the different things will work differently for different people or in different situations. So I'm just going to run through the slides that I have here and just kind of highlight some of the things on there that I think are the big takeaways. So for probiotics and omega-3, for patients with mast cell activation syndrome or histamine intolerance, I like people to be aware that there are certain probiotic strains that can increase histamine and others that will decrease them. And I have them listed here. So if somebody has been taking a probiotic and doesn't do well with it, and they have some of these issues, you may want to look at the individual ingredients and see if any of the species there that increase histamine are in that product. The one increase it may be a better bet, just in terms of not then flaring up your MCAS while you're trying to then work your vagus nerve. Because remember, the vagus nerve is getting input from the cells and the microbiome. So if we have disruptions in the microbiome, that can be a trigger to vagus nerve dysfunction. So we want to make sure that we've got that piece as part of our overall picture. For omega-3s, just want people to watch your source for purity? Do they test for heavy metals and other contaminants? Does it have any heat exposure that could then potentially make it go rancid, which we don't want people taking rancid oil. Breathing, a lot of us don't actually breathe. I find myself doing that sometimes. We get enough air in that we can function with that level of oxygen. I don't necessarily want people to do deep breathing, especially if that doesn't feel right or feel good. The goal is to slow your breathing down enough so it's easy and relaxed. And natural breathing uses the diaphragm, which will create belly breathing. So I don't want people to force it, but I want people to be aware of how are you breathing, how often are you breathing, and where are you breathing? Are you breathing into your chest with your chest muscles, or are you breathing with your diaphragm down into your belly? The Buteyko breathing technique is something that is specifically used for neurological conditions like anxiety, stress, and panic attacks, which I think in my mind, that means that it could be beneficial for then any sort of nervous system dysregulation, which could include vagus nerve. So that's something that people can look into. There are practitioners who can help people with that, but I think they also then can have you do exercises at home that then people can do on their own. So meditation, I have some people who are like, I can't meditate. And I'm telling them, it doesn't have to be like this idea of you're sitting cross-legged on the floor in a certain position or doing a certain thing. It can be anything. You can meditate while you're doing the dishes. Sometimes it can be helpful to set aside a place or have other inputs that help to create associations with that experience of meditation. So sometimes having like, you light a candle, that's your meditation candle. It could just help trigger your brain to go, oh, that's right, that means it's meditation time. I can start getting into that space. It does not just have to be you're clearing your mind. You could meditate on gratitude. Sending out love, and you're focusing, you're just taking some time and focusing on how many people and places and things and pets and foods and whatever I love, that fills you with that experience of while you are sending that out. If you're doing it when you're doing the chatter, and just look at the flowers. This is a great time here, at least because we're in spring, and so lots of things are starting to and so you can walk around the neighborhood and see, oh, that person's daffodils are up. Oh, nice, move around and being in the present and being in a state of being in love. So it's not directed towards a specific person, but it's the state of I am loving. And that's my state of being right now. I'm going to skip this last one because I'm just looking at my time. I want to make sure we have enough time. Laughter is great. And laughter is beneficial if it is actually triggered by external stimuli, like something you find funny or a positive emotion. But it can also be if you laugh, if you make yourself laugh. So it doesn't have to be necessarily that there was something funny. If you just laugh, it'll change the vagus nerve. Stopping a child's arrhythmia. So if we think about the vagus nerve being one of the inputs to the heart, from an electrical perspective, that would make sense then if we change the vagus nerve functioning. Cold motility, you can start working with that through the vagus nerve, and cold applications can actually do that. It can increase pancreatic enzymes and digestive secretion, so it's actually helping the function of the digestive system. It could be to your face. You could do a cold pack on the back of your forehead to be the person, hey, I never want somebody to push this really hard that then they actually feel stress. We're trying to avoid stress.
Kimberly, can I just interrupt you there for a moment? We're just struggling
The
a little
cold is
bit
one of
with
those things that can actually
with the
really help the nerve. With singing, you got to
sorry,
talk
Kimberly, we're just struggling a little bit with your internet connection. Sorry, I think we've lost you temporarily.
Oh, I have not moved or anything. Is there any?
Yeah, sorry, we're just losing a lot of what you're saying in the last couple of slides. I just wonder whether sometimes turning off your video can help just with more of the streaming to the slides. So maybe we could just give that a go for a bit and see if it helps.
Turning off my
Yeah, we just can't hear you very well at the moment.
camera. Let me see if I try that.
Should just be at the bottom of your screen. There's a stop video option. Although we might have lost you altogether at this point. Okay, looks like we've temporarily lost Kimberly. She's just rejoining now.
Okay. It just said it was reconnecting. So is that
right?
Can you hear me
Okay,
now?
we can hear you. Yeah, I think we just temporarily
Okay.
lost you altogether.
Do you need me to go back to any slides?
No,
Because
I think just keep going. That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Because we
Okay.
will circulate your slides to
Okay.
everybody, and we've got the other resources we'll talk about at the end that people can tap into
Okay.
if they
Well,
want to
then
learn more about your work.
let me know if you lose me again, and we'll see
I
what we
will.
can do.
I
Great.
will. Sorry to interrupt your
Oh, no,
presentation.
not at all. No, thank you for letting me know. I would hate to keep talking and you not hearing any of it. That defeats the purpose. So with singing, you really got to
sorry.
belt it
Now,
out.
one more thing, Kimberly. We'll just need you to share your slides again because we've lost
Oh,
that.
yes.
We've lost that connection as well.
Oh goodness, where? No. Where's the?
So just down the bottom, you should have a share screen option on Zoom.
No, that's. Oh, I don't know what that just did. That's a search. No, that's captions.
Have you got the share screen button in the middle?
Is that it? Did I get it?
No, it hasn't come up.
All right, let's screen. Let me see about. I am not seeing. Oh, there we go. Let me see if that screen share. I am so sorry.
No, that's fine. We've got it now. So
Okay.
yeah, just that button again.
There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Try this again.
Take two.
Exactly. Take two. Okay. So for this singing, one of the things that's interesting is that when Dr. Rosenberg in his book talks about when he's assessing vagus nerve function, people can have a more monotone sound to their voice when there's vagus nerve dysfunction, because there's a branch off the vagus nerve that controls the motion of the vocal cords, which controls the voice. So we can use the voice then to signal back then up to the vagus nerve. So with singing, you got to belt it out. you got to really sing. You got to channel your like inner Aretha Franklin. This is not just kind of humming. Humming is fine, but you really get it if you really sing. And it's interesting that one study found that just even listening to joyful music opened arteries and increased blood flow, similar to aerobic exercise. So that's pretty significant. Gargling also can stimulate then the muscles at the back of the throat and the vocal cords. The gag reflex is also controlled by the vagus nerve, but gagging yourself isn't as fun. So I let people know that, yes, that is an option, but I think there are other things that are better, more fun. Weighted blankets are fabulous. Generally, you want the weight of the blanket to be 10% of the body weight. It should help you to feel safe and kind of secure, not trapped. And if you have children that you want to work with this, they should always be able to get out from under the blanket on their own. If it's too heavy that they can't do that, then that is going to be stressful for them and it's not going to be helpful. If a whole weight blanket is too much, you can try a bag of rice or something else that just has some weight on it. You could try an ice pack under the rice to get then both like cold and weight. So some of these things, like obviously a weighted blanket isn't going to work for a vagus nerve support if, say, you're in a meeting at work. Humming, singing probably isn't either, but you could lean forward and press down on your legs. You could do joint rotations. There are all sorts of, that's why I give people lots of options to try. Acetylcholine support is something, because that's the main neurotransmitter that's used by the vagus nerve. I've listed out some of the symptoms of acetylcholine deficiency, and a lot of those then be associated with POTS and with just generally vagus nerve dysfunction. So normally acetyl groups for making this are provided by a compound called acetyl-CoA, which comes from the citric acid cycle, which is part of the cycle that mitochondria use to make energy. So my question is, well, what if you're in that cell danger response and your mitochondria aren't making energy? Then you're not going to be making enough acetyl groups. And then you may not be making enough acetylcholine, and that could actually be another way that the CDR connects with that vagus nerve dysfunction. So I'll use a combination of things. So I'll use acetyl L-carnitine for those acetyl groups. I use CDP choline for the choline groups. And then pantethine, which is B5, which is a cofactor for the enzyme that basically hooks those together. Aromatherapy is something that I really like a lot, because unlike the other senses, the olfactory nerve doesn't have to cross the blood-brain barrier. So it means the olfactory nerve is actually an extension of the brain and has a direct connection to the brain. And this may be why the sense of smell is the one that most strongly evokes memories for people, because I've heard it called an elevator straight to the brain. So anything in your nose goes straight up, and it goes straight to the limbic system first. So there's a class of scents in aromatherapy called euphorics. And this refers to any scent that kind of, as one of my teachers put it, ensconces somebody in a bliss bubble. And it just kind of smooths and soothes the energy body, stabilizes your heart center, and engenders safety. I've listed ones that are typically considered to be euphorics, but it can be really individual. So I have a note there. I have a whole box of essential oils because I do aroma acutherapy, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is, well, it's basically using essential oils instead of needles on acupuncture points. And it's really, really profound for trauma. If you can find someone who does that work, that can be really, really significant in helping with all of this vagus nerve and limbic system function. But I had opened my box and we were looking at some of these that are typically that I've listed there, and were fine. She didn't like any of them. And she opened the clary sage, and it was fascinating to watch because she was very young, and right in front of my eyes, I mean, I could see her going into this bliss state that she just smelled it and was just, oh, she's like, I like this one. And I thought, okay, clary sage it is. And so you could use this anytime, anywhere. I will have patients smell them, have a little bottle with them, smell it. You can put it on different places of your body, whatever is kind of calling to you. It could be the top of your head, bottoms of your feet, over your heart, your belly, anywhere. And the goal is just to help to get your system to shift into this kind of state so that you can have that experience. So as I said, you try different options, see what works best for you. Some things do require a practitioner, a lot you can do on your own. And as I said, I like the aroma point therapy because it's the combination of the acupuncture and oils. I would say almost anything that somebody finds helps them get into that bliss state, that safety state, can be valuable. So it's not that it has to be something on this list. If people find different things that help them get to that place, they need to put that on their list. Getting out in nature, being with people who fill your bucket, doing things for others that fill your bucket, anything that helps you to get into that place is going to be really important. And it is showing, as we're starting to do research into these different things, there's actual real physical changes that happen when we do these things. So it's not just like, oh, well, that sounds nice, or that would feel nice. It's actually making changes in your nervous system and in your body and in your cells. So these things may sound like, they're nice things to do. No, they're actually really powerful. There are also external vagus nerve stimulators. There are 2 instructions on there about how you can make your own from TENS units. And there's a whole bunch of different ones out there on the market. I've only had a handful of people, honestly, who've tried them, and they've had very variable results. So some of them can be pricey. So I often recommend people trying these things at home before they start making the investment in a stimulator that may or may not work for them. So Dr. Rosenberg also has some incredibly simple exercises in his book, and they're really effective and they're super easy. I just put down here, just as an example, his basic exercise. This will take you 30 to 60 seconds, and the only thing you have to do is move your eyes. So I think that's a super great thing because it's something that you can do anywhere, really, although probably not while you're driving. And you can do it as often as you want. There's no overdoing it. He does talk about lying comfortably on your back. I have tried it sitting up, and it worked just as well. So that's part of his instructions, which is why I kept it there. But I would say you could do it anywhere, seated, standing, laying, whatever's most comfortable for you. And you literally are just looking to one side for 30 to 60 seconds and then looking to the other side. And you're just moving your eyes, because there is a branch of the vagus nerve that goes to then the muscles that control the movements of the eyes. So the same way that we're using the singing to kind of signal back to the vagus nerve, hey, calm down, we're using the eyes to signal back. So how do we know if any of this is actually helping? These are some of the things that I look for. People find that they're in that parasympathetic, that ventral vagus state more often as their baseline. So they're not in sympathetic fight or flight, and they're not in shutdown. They're in a state of calm, and they have energy. Over time, it's taking a bigger and bigger stimulus to kick somebody out of that parasympathetic state. If somebody does get out of it, the response is smaller. So somebody may feel a little revved up rather than a full panic, or they may feel a little checked out rather than going into a full shutdown. The process of getting into sympathetic or that dorsal vagus becomes slower. Rather than being like, 0 to 60 in a millisecond, people feel like, oh, I feel like I'm moving in that direction. That can be really helpful because that allows people time to use some of these tools in real time to disrupt the process. And then it takes less activity or less time to get back to then that ventral vagus state. So it's easier then to get back. So we're seeing that, oh, okay, there are things that are working. And I know it's working because I'm starting to see these changes in how my system is working. So as I said, we still need these other branches of the autonomic nervous system, but we want to be able to move among the states in a way that is actually appropriate to whatever the current situation is. And the ability to assess that current situation with clarity is then where we get into the limbic system retraining. So all limbic system retraining programs and all brain retraining programs are really based around the research into neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to just constantly change. And so this adaptability and learning, again, can either get us into problems because we get stuck in the fight, flight, freeze state, because that's what the inputs have been, or we can use this knowledge to actually create pathways that support health, positive mood, and that parasympathetic state. So just to remind you of that conscious mind, limbic system, brainstem pathway, that's really what we're working with. We're going to take the conscious mind and use it to retrain the limbic system, kind of like a human would then train their guard dog. What do you bark at and what do you not? So all of them have some commonalities. And so the basic steps are awareness. What are those triggers? Interrupting that process acknowledging kind of what's going on, and then doing some sort of visualization, changing your mood, changing something so you are actually changing the direction of the nerve pathways. This is kind of a simple structure that people can follow on their own. There are programs though that you can do at home on your own that I think are really beneficial because they give more information, they give more support. There are mentors in some of these programs, they have group supports, and it can be really helpful to have all of that as you're going through this process. Some programs are more active and some are more passive, and you can combine them. There are some that rely on sound or light, and I do just let people know that if people have sensitivities in those areas, those may not be the best choices. And there isn't one that is the best that you have to try and ascribe to. They're all really different, and I want the one that when people look at them online or read summaries, they go, oh, that one sounds good. Then that's the one that's the right one for you. So when you first look at some of these programs, sometimes people will think that you're just supposed to ignore your symptoms and think happy thoughts and everything will be fine. And I will admit, when I first learned about this, that's what I thought. I was like, oh, I'm just supposed to ignore what I'm feeling and just pretend like I'm okay. That's not what they're doing. They are using your conscious mind as a tool to reteach your limbic system. It's more about where do you want to be rather than focusing on where you are. So we want you to have your full range of emotions. What I want to know is how long are you staying in those emotions? What actions are you taking? And what is it doing for you? So for example, anger can be destructive or it can be motivating. That's the foundation of a lot of our social justice movements. So anger is not a bad thing. But if it becomes overwhelming, then it becomes destructive. Fear is a good emotion because it can indicate when something really is dangerous. And I don't want ever anyone to discount or gaslight their own experiences or emotions, especially if there is a fear. We need clarity, though, to know, is this a real fear because of a current situation? Or is this a limbic system driven fear that is solely based on the past and is actually harming you and getting in your way now? It is actually not helping you. We also need to be aware of the language that we're using when we talk to ourselves, because the limbic system will use that as one of its inputs to assess danger. And so saying, I'm never going to get any better is very different to the limbic system than saying, I'm having a really hard day today and I'm working hard to maintain my hope. That has a profound difference in the nervous system. And again, I want to make sure that people are having treatments to resolve the initial threat, working with the vagus nerve, and then the limbic system. Figuring out that initial threat can be difficult and can take time, so I wouldn't want to make sure that everything's absolutely clear before starting limbic retraining, but I do tell people this is something that we need to have through the whole process, and you may find more changes as we are eliminating those threats on that cellular level because we're taking that burden off of the limbic system. So people sometimes will have a bigger response as they are doing this longer than when they did in the beginning. And I just want people to know that because I don't want them to give up in the beginning if it didn't make this dramatic change initially. It may take some time. And that's okay. We just need to keep supporting that process or see, is there anything else that we need to do to make that an easier process? So I talked about this a little bit then in terms of, all of the testing showing up normal and the patients then are just, told that it's all in your head. And so I will say, sometimes I will thank my limbic system when I do actually talk to my limbic system directly. And I will say, thank you. And I know you're working really hard to keep me safe and I appreciate that. Let's figure out if this is really dangerous for me. So I don't say it's doing a good job because I don't want to reinforce the behavior. I appreciate the intent. So my note in here is that we have Great Pyrenees. And when we were doing some training for them, I use a lot of dog analogies, I'm realizing with this. But when we were doing some training, they were saying that when the dog was barking, to give acknowledgement that you've heard them and you recognize that, they're barking and you're going to look into it, but don't give them praise because you don't want them to keep barking. You don't want them to teach them to keep barking, but you also don't want to ignore it either. So there's that fine balance between, okay, I'm recognizing this, I'm acknowledging it, and I'm going to see what do we actually need to do. I think this is really important because a lot of people with chronic illness feel like their bodies have betrayed them, their bodies are working against them, and they're not safe even in their own bodies. So I want to help reframe this because everything your body's doing with this topic that we're talking about today is all based on something to keep you safe, which is a good thing. The problem is that it's overdoing it and that those responses have gotten dysfunctional. So we need to change how we approach the problem. It's not just that my body, hates me. It's that my body is really working hard and it's not working very well, and I need to step in and give it some help. So there are a whole bunch of different limbic system retraining systems, and I'll pop through a couple of them just to point out some things. But you can read on all of the different slides on there, the different pieces of information. And again, there isn't one that's better than the other. So DNRS is Annie Hopper's program, and this is the Gupta program and the Primal Trust, I think, are the ones that I probably have the most number of people who have used, so I know the most about them in terms of how they work for patients. And this is then kind of the summary of the program itself. And there's then a lot of really in-depth content. I will say with the DNRS, one of the things that Annie Hopper talks about is doing rounds, I think she calls them, that are an hour long. And I have told patients, you don't have to do it for an hour. And especially if they can't do it for an hour, I don't want them doing it for an hour, because that will then create more and more stress. You can do 5 minutes, then that's where you start. 5 minutes is still more than 0, and that's a good thing. And if that fits with where somebody is right now and what they can handle, then that becomes a positive. And that then will help them to be able to do 6 minutes, and then 7 minutes, and then 8 minutes, and then maybe we'll jump to 10, and then maybe we'll jump to 15, and then they will get to being able to do the full program. If somebody really tries to push themselves to do more, then it isn't going to end up being positive. So we need to make sure that we don't get into the bulldozer brain mode of, I'm just going to push through this because this is a good thing for me and I'm supposed to do it. We absolutely have to listen to where we are and say, okay, I need to do this. How do I modify this so that it works for me, for where I am right now? So these are all the different things that the program uses in terms of the different aspects of it. There's also the Gupta program, and it's sometimes called the amygdala retraining program. This kind of is a summary of from Dr. Gupta, and he talks about some of these things up at the top, the predisposing factors, the triggers, the stressors. That's where you're getting into the CDR, and then you start getting into then the sympathetic and then the limbic system. These are the components that he talks about, and they do have a mini course for patients to try out before you purchase the whole program. And then there is an online program for physicians on there as well, that physicians can then check it out. There are some differences between them. Gupta does include parts work or internal family systems, and a lot of what they focus on, the Gupta program is much more meditative. The DNRS program is not as much, and it has a lot more structure in terms of how it is organized. So sometimes people like that organization and structure. They may like the DNRS better. Some people like then the slower kind of building gradual, the more fluid process. That's more than the Gupta program. So this is just kind of a summary of the differences between two, but I always want people to check them out. Primal Trust is another one that I've seen more of, and I do like this because Primal Trust does include a lot of vagal work even within it. So you're getting more vagus supports even within the limbic system retraining program. Those are not as much in the DNRS or the Gupta program. But I also like that in the last step of the Primal Trust, there is a focus on purpose and your ongoing personal transformation, your commitment and connection and contribution to community. How do you re-engage? How do you inspire others? Like, it takes it from not just you, it helps you to then kind of move out into the world, which I really like. There is something called acceptance and commitment therapy. This is a type of psychotherapy, so someone would need to work with a provider to do this. But I also have the different principles and components in here. So this is something that I've also had some patients just say, I want to try this, kind of working with this myself and just looking at these different principles, seeing how much I can work with this myself. I do like in the first step of it, the last bullet point is that we want to stop the belief that all of our thoughts are reality, our truth, important, our orders, our whys, or our threats. In other words, don't believe everything that you think. And that's something that we have to sometimes unhook, because if you've been getting these signals over and over and over, we have to stop sometimes and say, wait a minute, is that true? Hang on a second. I don't think that's true. Okay, that's old stuff that's showing up now. So it is helpful for us, I think, to go through this process of saying, oh, all right, let me actually look at what it is that I'm thinking and how I'm thinking. And is that actually fit with what's going on right now, fit with my values, fit with what I want as a person? And that's something that we can do for ourselves all the time. And then they talk about expansion and acceptance. With this, acceptance does not mean everything's okay. It means that you're just acknowledging that I'm having these thoughts, I'm having these feelings, and that they exist. And then again, staying present, observing yourself, and especially without judgment. This is a process, I think, where a lot of people learn about themselves, which is really good. If we can do it in a way that is open and in a perspective, kind of more of exploration of just learning. I'm learning about this person, and how can I do this in a way that is just allows things to be as they are. And if there's something that, I'm not sure that I like that thing. Okay, where does that come from? I can explore that. I can dig into that a little bit. And then I can see, okay, well, then what would I rather have? What would I rather do? If I would rather have a different response, what would that be? Where would I want to go with that? And then fitting that into, what are our values? What works best for us? And then how do I act on that? So I've got the reference there for the 6 principles. They actually have some worksheets that people can do on their own. The list there is for providers in Portland because that's where I'm located, but there may be other providers. I think there are worldwide. And then there's brain tapping, and that uses, this is one of the programs that does use sound and music and spoken word. This does require you, though, to purchase their specific headset, and it does use sound and pulsed light. So if I have patients that are sensitive to those things, this is generally not one that we want to work with. This would be a program that would be more one of the passive programs where you put the headset on and then it does all of the work. And basically we're retraining the brain through the inputs of light and sound. So this is then a guided visualization, and they use these binaural beats and the specific tones. Brain spotting, I'm thinking I'm probably gonna have to wrap up pretty quick because we're running out of time. So a brain spot is considered to be an eye position that is related to an energetic or emotional activation of some charged issue within the brain. This is something that is best done with a provider, because the provider will then be watching the person and will be looking for reflexes that may indicate that, oh, okay, that position of your eyes there's something there. And then they can work with those eye movements to then help work with whatever the issue is. And it can be done either at directing at something that is distressing, or on the positive end of how to establish and strengthen resources. What are the positives that you're trying to work on? This is the directory then that has certified practitioners and actually information on different trainings. The Safe and Sound protocol is Dr. Porges's specific program. It was based on his polyvagal theory. So this obviously uses sound. There is a 5-day music therapy intervention, and then they have playlists with headphones that then can be delivered either in a clinic or remotely. This is one that you would need to work with a provider on. This is another one that, again, requires this app and the stereo headphones, and it creates a meditation combination of your own voice. And they use that to provide familiarity. Obviously, some people don't like actually to hear the sound of their own voice. I think it's interesting. I know singers who are like, I don't listen to my own songs because I don't want to hear my voice. So if that was the case, this wouldn't be the best program for somebody. But then they use all of these then other frequencies to help relax heart rate, decrease cortisol, and then work with brain function. And so they use specific rhythms and these binaural beats, and then using the 3D sounds with your own voice. So then you put this on and you listen to it. The lightning process is something that also works with the neuro-linguistic programming and life coaching. And so it's basically about looking at recognizing destructive unconscious patterns that are activating these brain pathways, and then changing these patterns to create the new pathways. So it is a more intensive interactive training, and there are hours of then like one-on-one coaching and follow-up, but this would then be like 3 days of training. So This obviously would be a more compressed and intensive kind of interaction. And then you would take those things out then into your daily life. There's direct your own care. I'm thinking, Celine, I probably should move through these pretty quick. There's Unlearn Your Pain from Dr. Schubner. This one he is very focused with this on pain specifically. So this is a good one if somebody has pain, but it is also something that could be, you could take the principles of it and apply it to other things. He started this because he recognized that the brain can generate as well as modulate pain. And this is one of the big differences between chronic pain and acute pain, because there's this central nervous system change that happens with chronic pain. And so the brain is really involved in this process. And what he was finding, I believe he was an osteopath, kept finding these very weak links between pain and what people are experiencing and findings on imaging or physical exam. So he would have these patients who would say, like, I've got this pain in my shoulder, but they do imaging, they do exam, they wouldn't find anything. And so what this patient was probably experiencing was then the brain has a map of the body, and that the neurons around that shoulder were firing pain signals down so that the patient was experiencing pain in a place that didn't have any actual injury. So they didn't need physical therapy on the shoulder. They needed to work with the brain processing and modulation of pain. So this is then his approach. And then working really with the pain coming from the nervous system and not the periphery, not that somewhere else in the body. And then the same thing, this is a patient of mine who's actually done this program herself. And this was really interesting because she had had cataract surgery and was having ongoing incredible light sensitivity and pain in her eyes, to the point that she really wasn't able to go outside anymore. And she had been to so many eye specialists and they couldn't find anything that was wrong. And they just told her, well, you're probably just going to need to, not go outside. And that was just not okay. She wasn't going to live her life inside. And she started working with this program, and she kept talking to her eyes, that her eyes were okay, and that yes, that surgery had been significant and they were okay now. And she was actually able to start getting outside more often. And then she finally got to the point, she's like, I can go outside and just wear a regular sun hat and be okay. So this is one that I do have a patient specifically who's used this one, that had a really significant response to it. These are some options if you have kids that you're wondering about vagus nerve, because some of these things are going to be difficult for kids to do because they just don't have the same level of self-awareness oftentimes that adults do, or they can't express things in the same way, and their brains aren't myelinated the same way that adult brains are. Kids' brains are different than adults. So some of them may have trouble doing some of these programs, but they do have some programs that are specifically designed for kids, if that's a helpful resource. And then there are all these other things that you can think about. So some of these things are similar to the vagus nerve supports, and so there is overlap between the two of them. EMDR is great, EFT is great, microcurrent can be really helpful, craniosacral, homeopathy, acupuncture, I mean, all of these different things. Again, find your oil that you like best and carry a bottle with you. Prayer, art therapy, anywhere that you feel relaxed, happy, and safe. I think it's really important for people to create more of those environments, spend time with those people. That is not a luxury. That is not a nice extra thing. That is essential to us being healthy people. So again, we only heal when we are safe and happy and relaxed. And so I think that is part of our birthright as humans, all of us. And so taking the time to do that self-care is really, really important. It is not selfish. It is not being self-centered. It is caring for yourself. And that is really, really crucial. And I would say also pay attention to your everyday, your wandering thoughts. If you're just walking around in your day, just notice, where do your thoughts go? Do you tend to be towards more of negative thought processes? Do you catastrophize? Start paying attention to those things. And can you come up with a different wording, a different way of looking at it that maybe has a little bit more positivity to it? Those things may seem like, that's so tiny, that's not going to make a difference. It does if you start adding it up. So it's like, if you think about $1 isn't a whole lot, but if you had 1 million of them, that's a lot of money. So we can look at these little places And that's what I really find is most helpful, is trying different things, and we get a little bit of one thing, a little bit of something else, a little bit of something else, and we put it all together and we start actually getting momentum. And once you start getting that change, then things really do start to build, and then they really do start to change. And then all of a sudden, your new baseline is, I am happy, relaxed, and safe. Oh, that feels lovely. So kind of wrap it all up. With the cell danger response, try to identify any of those initial triggers. And if there are any that are still present, work with those. And if it is gone, even identifying it can maybe helpful to see how it has impacted you or created any changes. And then with the vagus and limbic, try those different options, try lots of different things, create a toolbox for yourself and write it down somewhere, because it is harder to remember helpful things when you're in the situation where you actually need them. So if at that point you're thinking, oh, okay, everything is exploding, I need help, our brains just kind of shut off sometimes and we can't think of those things in real time. So if you have a list, that's much easier to then go to and be like, oh, that's right, I could go sing. Oh, I could put cold on my neck. I could go call a friend. I could go outside. I could, whatever your list is, it makes it easier for you. And be kind and gentle to yourself. This is a process. There's a lot that can come up with this that people are unpacking. It may not even be just initial trauma now. This may tie back to traumas from years ago. And so treat yourself as if you would someone you love who is dealing with these things, so that you can start being one of the people who fills your bucket, so that you are then in a better relationship with yourself, because that matters and it makes a big difference. And you deserve it. So, Celine, I don't know, I hope all of that came through in terms of our connection on the internet.
It was actually really fabulous once we reset.
Oh, good.
So yeah.
Good. Okay.
That was
Do
fantastic.
you have the question? Oh, good.
Fantastic, Kimberly. Thank you very much. Such
Absolutely. Oh, it's my pleasure.
useful information.
Well, and as you can, this is really important. And I think that this is a key piece that people don't get in healthcare. And
yes,
it really does make a difference. I think people have to know that you're not going to heal unless all of these systems are working right, and we can help them to work right.
Absolutely. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for all of that fabulous information. We will go through a few minutes of Q&A.
Yeah.
I realize that we may not have got through all of the information that you wanted to present today, Kimberly, but I did want to let everyone know that Kimberly has done a series of podcasts with Standing Up to POTS. So that's an organization in America who presents a podcast on a weekly basis that's called the Potscast. And Kimberly very kindly did 3 episodes of those podcasts where you can access each of the elements that she's presented today and follow up in a bit more detail if you're looking to do that.
And just for reference, they are episodes number 109, 110, and 112 for people.
Perfect.
So they can find them. And there's an hour on each of the 3, the cell danger, the vagus, and the limbic. So I talk slower and go into more detail.
So 3 hours of content there. I really appreciate you condensing all of that for us today. Yeah. Okay, so one of our attendees has asked if the cell danger response can show up on blood tests, or is there any way of knowing which phase of the cell danger response you might be in?
There isn't any blood testing that is clinically available. I'm not sure if Dr. Navio has some tests that he's doing on a research level, but there isn't anything that I'm aware of that as like a clinician I could order for a patient. I see most often people are in the CDR1 because that's typically who I'm seeing in terms of being in that acute threat state. That's most often what we're seeing. And then in terms of then the vagus dysfunction and the limbic dysfunction. The pain, it could be CDR3, but usually it's CDR1. And we know that the cells will go through that process when they have everything that they need. So I'm not as focused on which phase are you in, because there may be some cells that are in phase 1 and some that are in 2 and some that are in 3. It's not that every cell is going to go through this exactly the same. So what I'm looking for is, are you moving in that direction towards healing, towards more health? Then I know we're getting more and more cells that are moving through that process.
Yeah, great, thank you. Another one of our attendees has asked if you have any particular tips on calming down the brain's response to smells if it is hypervigilant. So would you recommend starting with safe smells and then trying to expand out from there, or some of the more general techniques that you've discussed in terms of getting us into that ventral vagal nerve state?
I would probably try both. And I would make sure with the safe smells that there's a lot of consciousness around that. So getting a smell that you know is safe and smelling it and say, oh, I'm smelling this, I know this is safe. Smells that have positive associations and positive memories would also be another place to start recognizing that, okay, smells I have a library of smells that are safe. Can I start increasing that? I would be curious about if there are particular smells, if they are more chemical based, then there may actually be a mast cell activation component to that. They may actually be having a reaction to something in the chemical. So like I have patients who can't tolerate perfumes. I don't know that that's necessarily just CDR and vagus. That could be that the mast cells are actually having a chemical response to that. So I would probably try the generals and then seeing if they can expand out those smells and getting more observations around which smells are okay and which ones aren't. And are there commonalities? Are there any themes or patterns that they can identify that, oh, that's an issue? If it is someone who is female or has menses, I would be curious to see, are there times within a menstrual cycle that those are worse versus better? There may be a hormonal component to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really typical for us to see those flares in POTS symptoms around the menstrual cycle. You know, often that's immediately premenstrual. Sometimes it's around ovulation as well. So there's definitely those associations with flares, which is interesting.
And hormones can affect sense of smell, because I know that when I was pregnant, my sense of smell was so strong. I mean, I could smell anything, everything. It was really quite amazing, and not always pleasant because I couldn't turn it off. But there were times that I noticed that, okay, I think there's a hormonal component, and I don't know if it's a hormonal component directly affecting nervous system or something about the olfactory nerve itself specifically, but I do know that hormones can affect sense of smell. So I'd be curious to see, is there a pattern there? So then that might be an indication that, okay, for that person, then there's something hormonally going on that needs to be looked at in addition to which cells are safe from a vagus perspective.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Somebody else has asked if they wanted to try cold exposure on their neck and face, is there a particular time that would be best to do that? So is that really just for when you're in a symptom flare, or is it something that you would do more regularly to be more preventative or prophylactic?
I would say both. I will have patients just splash some cold water on their face or get a washcloth and put some cold water on and just kind of hold it, or just hold it on the back of their neck. And when I have people do that, I will just say, really, like, just be aware of the cold, be aware of your breathing, just let yourself kind of sink in and have the experience of the cold, because that will also bring you into your body. And it is very hard to have sympathetic dominance kind of spiraling up if you're really grounded in your body. So people can try it both ways. And sometimes I'll have people do it in the evening before bed, especially if they have trouble going to sleep or falling asleep because the nervous system is ramped up. So try a little bit of cold before you go to bed and see if we can get that nervous system to calm down. And that could just become a nice time to do it. It really can be done at any time. And that's the other thing with a lot of these things, whenever works for you is the best time. Or if you think, I wonder if I should try some cold right now. The answer is yes. If it's on your radar and you're thinking about it, then yep. And leave it on as long as you want. Most people it won't be a super long time because they'll feel that shift and then they don't need it anymore.
Okay, just a couple more questions because we're running a
Yeah.
little bit over time.
Yep.
If somebody has an overactivation of the vagal nerve that does make them close to fainting, is exercises that stimulate the vagal nerve likely to make that worse, or is that going to regulate things a bit more over time?
No, so if there's a fainting component, I'm thinking that's probably the dorsal vagus nerve. So you're going into that freeze state. Everything is shutting down. That's a totally different branch. That is a threat branch, the same way that the sympathetic is. The ventral vagus, which is the front part of the vagus nerve, is the parasympathetic. That's the branch that all of these things that we just talked about, that's what's getting stimulated.
Yeah.
With all these different things. So that's going to actually help get you out of that, because when we stimulate that branch of the vagus nerve, it automatically shuts off the other branch of the vagus and the sympathetic. You can't be in both at the same time, and the body will say, oh, the ventral vagus gets priority. So if you've stimulated that, everybody else needs to just stop.
One more question. Somebody has asked, have you ever observed anybody who's fully resolved their symptoms without doing a limbic retraining program?
I will say no. I haven't.
Yeah.
And it may be the particular people I'm working with. Almost all of my patients have complex chronic illnesses that have been going on for years, and they have all kinds of things that then have happened because of that. They've had medical trauma, they've lost out on opportunities in life. I mean, they've had a lot of things that have impacted them in terms of stressors in life, in addition to the physical symptoms. So the majority of my patients have Ehlers-Danlos, POTS, MCAS, tethered cord, craniocervical instability. They have vascular conditions. They have all kinds of different things. And all of that starts impacting the nervous system. When you're in pain all the time, that's going to impact your nervous system. When you don't know if you can stand up without falling over, standing up becomes a stressful event. Well,
and
we
I
do
think,
that a lot during the day. So I think that I personally have not seen anybody who's been dealing with something like this. I also work with patients who have mold, who have Lyme, who have chronic viral infections. So they're in that soup of the CDR1. And so I have not seen people actually be able to fully resolve this without the vagus and limbic retraining.
And I think the way that looks is different for everybody. It doesn't necessarily mean, forking out a lot of money for
Right.
a specific program. I think that can look different for different people. And I think it's an area that we need so much more research in. What we don't have are studies that have really evaluated these programs. I've seen a couple that have been done in fibromyalgia with the program, but it's not something that's been exposed or explored on a large scale. So something that we definitely need more evidence to inform this space.
Absolutely. And I think we're starting to really understand how powerful the nervous system is, and what that brain plasticity really can do, both in the positive direction and in the challenging direction. And so I think it's a place that I'm hoping we do get more research, because it is something that I think affects a lot of people, no matter what the chronic illness diagnosis is or what they're dealing with. All of those things will impact the nervous system. And this is then where we start to see these patterns. And so this is why I said, these are theories at this point, and they will change over time, and they will work differently for different people. But I think even just like looking at some of the principles of, say, like the acceptance and commitment therapy, people can do that for themselves. They can work with those worksheets themselves. So you're right. It doesn't have to be that you have to then fork out a lot of money and do this structured program. You could start working with some of these things on your own. And there are then the whole list of other things that can work for helping that limbic system retraining.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time.
You are so welcome.
Today, Kimberly. I know it's evening for you and morning for us.
Yes.
But thank you so much for taking time out to present this fabulous information for us in our first webinar of 2025, not 2024, as I introduced. So I apologize. But thank you to all of our attendees for also joining us this evening. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of the questions, but there's Kimberly's slides who will be coming out to you all, so that you'll be able to revisit this information. You can rewatch this webinar or listen to the podcast if you want to learn more about Kimberly's presentation this evening. It's been fabulous.
And Selena, I'm sorry, I was going to say, if people still have questions, if you want to email those to me, I can email responses back to you if you have ways to get them to people, especially for people who are listening to this then afterward, in the evening. Then if other people have questions, I want them to be able to get some answers to their questions as well.
Fabulous, thank you. So please feel free to send your questions in, and I can pass those on to Kimberly. If you use the email address that was in the registration platform, you'll be able to get in touch with us and we can pass those on. Thank you very much for that, Kimberly.
You are very welcome.
Really appreciate your time this evening. Sorry, we've run over time. Our next webinar will be on Tuesday, the 10th of June, and that will focus on missing school and some steps you can take if your child or someone you know is missing out on school or university because of chronic illness. So we're very excited to be joined by Megan Gilmore from the Missing School Foundation, who'll be presenting that webinar on the 10th of June. So hopefully you'll all be able to join us then. Until then, take care everyone, and we'll see you next time.